Hey everybody, welcome back to the Withstand podcast. I pray that you're keeping well, and I thank you so much for being here as we come alongside each other as Christians, reading and studying and listening to the Bible together. In today's episode, our focus switches back to the book of Deuteronomy, and today we are in chapter 16, which we'll read through from beginning to end. This is God's word. Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover to the Lord your God. For in the month of Abib the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. Therefore you shall sacrifice the Passover to the Lord your God from the flock and the herd in the place where the Lord chooses to put his name. You shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread with it, that is, the bread of affliction. For you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, that you may remember the day in which you came out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life. And no leaven shall be seen among you in all your territory for 7 days, nor shall any of the meat which you sacrifice the first day at twilight remain overnight until morning. You may not sacrifice the Passover within any of your gates which the Lord your God gives you, but at the place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide. There you shall sacrifice the Passover at twilight, at the going down of the sun, at the time you came out of Egypt. And you shall roast and eat it in the place which the Lord your God chooses, and in the morning you shall turn and go to your tents. 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a sacred assembly to the Lord your God. You shall do no works on it. You shall count 7 weeks for yourself. Begin to count the 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. Then you shall keep the Feast of Weeks to the Lord your God with the tribute of a free will offering from your hand, which you shall give as the Lord your God blesses you. You shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant and your female servant, the Levite who is within your gates, the stranger and the fatherless, and the widow who are among you, at the place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide. And you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes. You shall observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days, when you have gathered from your threshing floor and from your winepress. And you shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant and your female servant, and the Levite, the stranger and the fatherless, and the widow, who are within your gates. 7 days you shall keep a sacred feast to the Lord your God in the place which the Lord chooses, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you surely rejoice. 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, at the Feast of Weeks, and at the Feast of Tabernacles. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. You shall appoint judges and officers in all your gates, which the Lord your God gives you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with just judgment. You shall not pervert justice, you shall not show partiality, nor take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous. You shall follow what is altogether just, that you may live and inherit the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not plant for yourself any tree as a wooden image near the altar which you build for yourself to the Lord your God. You shall not set up a sacred pillar which the Lord your God hates. This is the word of the Lord. Now let's look at what Tom Constable writes about the celebration of Passover, weeks, and booths. The point of connection in this section with what precedes is the sacrificial meals. Moses repeated here the instructions regarding those important feasts, which included sacrificial meals that the people would eat at the tabernacle. Often translated as feasts, the original idea is pilgrimage festival. Indeed, the Hebrew word hag is related to Arabic hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. Abib was the name of the first month on the Israelite calendar. It was on the 10th day of this month that the Israelites were to celebrate the Passover. They were to eat no leavened bread at this meal, and they were to have no contact with leaven during the following 7 days, which was called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They were to eat this meal at the tabernacle, later at the temple, the place where the Lord chooses to establish his name. The whole Passover lamb from the flock or the herd was to be totally consumed. None of it was to be left over and eaten later. This would distinguish it as a sacrifice from a regular meal. The Israelites were to sacrifice the Passover lamb at sunset because it was at sunset that their forefathers left Egypt. The Israelites roasted the Passover lamb, but they evidently boiled the additional offerings for that day. Another interpretation follows. Cook, more accurately boil, like other standard sacrifices. This prescription is at odds with the earlier stipulation that the Paschal offerings be roasted by fire, not boiled in water. The Passover is now being treated as a standard sacrifice. These two mutually inconsistent laws are harmonized in 2 Chronicles 35, where the Hebrew paradoxically reads, "They boiled the Passover offering by fire according to the law." The immense number of victims that had to be immolated or roasted on the eve of the Passover, that is within a space of 4 hours, has appeared to some writers a great difficulty, but the large number of officiating priests, their dexterity and skill in the preparation of the sacrifices, the wide range of the court, the extraordinary dimensions of the altar of burnt offering, and orderly method of conducting the solemn ceremonial rendered it easy to do that in a few hours, which would otherwise have required as many days. In the morning, after they'd finished eating the Passover, the Israelites were to return to their tents. On the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, they people were to have a festive assembly and do not work. The Feast of Weeks. 7 weeks after the Israelites began to harvest their spring wheat crop, they were to celebrate this feast. This date normally fell on the 7th day of the 9th month, Sivan, during our May and June. It was called the Feast of Weeks because it was held 7 weeks after Passover. The Israelites were to offer to the Lord voluntarily a proportional amount according to how he had blessed them. The whole nation, including visitors, were to gather at the tabernacle to celebrate the Lord's bountiful provision and his deliverance of the Israelites from Egypt. This 7-day feast, the Feast of Booths, was to take place at the tabernacle on the 15th through the 21st days of the 7th month, our September or October, at the end of the summer harvests. Like the Feast of Weeks, this feast was also to be observed by all the Israelites and non-Israelites who were in the land. All the male Israelites were to appear before the Lord at all 3 of these feasts, and they were to come with offerings to him. These 3 feasts focused on thankfulness for past deliverance, joy in present, grace, and hope in future glory. They amounted to a pledge of allegiance to Yahweh, the Israelites' suzerain and God, each time the Israelites celebrated them. They came to his presence to do so, like their Near Eastern neighbours similarly returned to their kings, periodically to honour them. The ancient requirement that the men of Israel should report to the central sanctuary 3 times a year has an interesting parallel in the Near Eastern treaty requirements. It was common practice for suzerains to require their vassals to report to them periodically, in some cases 3 times a year, in order to renew their allegiance and to bring tribute. God's people should celebrate their redemption from sin, remember their previous spiritually enslaved condition, and rejoice in God's provisions, corporately and regularly. These are the things that God encourages Christians to remember at the Lord's Supper, as well as at other times. 2 of the churches I pastored, of course this is Tom Constable speaking, celebrated significant anniversaries while I was serving them, and during those special years we took them in our worship services to remember the goodness of the Lord and thank him for all that he had done. It was helpful for the younger members to learn about the sacrifices people had made in the past, and it was good for the older members to receive a new challenge for the future. After all, the church isn't a parking lot, it's a launching pad. I love that. The 5th commandment is honour your father and your mother. What follows is legislation that advocates respecting authority figures in the nation, which functioned like an extended family. With the regency of Yahweh and the proper protocol by which he had to be approached having been established, the covenant text then addresses the human leaders who serve him and exercise authority over the nation at large. Just as in its religious worship, the Israelitish nation was to show itself to be the holy nation of Jehovah, so was it in its political relations also. This thought forms a link between the laws already given and those which follow. Although Western political theory is normally traced back to ancient Athens, this section is remarkable for providing what seems to be the first blueprint for a constitutional system of government. The carefully thought out plan is designed to ensure that no single branch of government and no single religious institution should have sole power. Each is brought into relationship to the others, and more importantly, each is made subordinate to the one true authority, the Torah of Deuteronomy. As in the other sections of Deuteronomy, here too Moses emphasized underlying principles and attitudes more than procedures. Here he stressed the principle of justice. Probably the people chose their judges by popular consensus and general agreement, and the leaders of the nation then officially appointed them. Judges were individuals responsible for administering justice, and officers were administrators charged with the enforcement of laws, perhaps similar to modern police officers. The number of these in each town probably varied according to the needs of the community. For most of us today, the notion that it is always and everywhere wrong for a judge to take a gift from a litigant probably seems so obvious as to be virtually self-evident. Nevertheless, the fact remains that the idea has historically been far from apparent to a large part of humankind. In the ancient Near East, for instance, almost every society regarded the practice of judges taking gifts from litigants as being perfectly moral and absolutely legitimate. A gift giver placed upon a recipient a binding moral obligation to respond in kind. Importantly, such reciprocity is not considered morally reprehensible. Indeed, the failure of either judge or litigant to reciprocate is deemed immoral and unjust. In this respect, then, Israel was to be different from other nations. In Israel, as in much of the ancient world, the human judge was considered proxy for the divine judge. For instance, in 2 Chronicles 19. Deuteronomy is passionately concerned about justice. Justice and only justice you shall pursue, which makes this a condition of living and prospering in the land. This follows from the doctrine of Israel as a community of brothers, equal before God. In order to give the people and the judges appointed by them a brief practical admonition as to the things they were more especially to observe in their administration of justice, Moses notices by way of example a few crimes that were deserving of punishment, and then proceeds in chapter, I think that's 17. I'm not very good with Roman numerals, guys. I think that's chapter 17, to describe more fully the judicial proceedings in the case of idolaters. An Asherah was probably a sacred tree or group of trees, or a wooden pole that the Canaanites used in the worship of their female fertility goddess, Asherah. Asherah was evidently both the name of the Canaanite goddess and a cult object used in her worship. The Canaanites usually made this image or sacred pillar or sacred stone or stone pillar out of stone, and they used it in the worship of Baal, the male Canaanite god of fertility, and Asherah. But evidently the Canaanites also worshipped wooden Asherahs. In Canaan, the Asherah trees, pillars, or groves were associated with oracular verdicts by their gods and goddesses. The judges were not to tolerate the planting of these Asherah trees or poles, which was so common in Canaan that the people regarded them as a prominent part of the native culture. Judges customarily dispensed justice in the open space near the main gate of each town. This area was the main congregating place of the community. And as always, guys, I'll leave a link to these notes in the show notes for you. Now, given today, we learned that the Israelites were to remember exactly what God had done for them. They had a need, and He provided for them, and He still has promises that He's keeping to the Israelites, which of course we all know will be fulfilled in God's perfect timing. So today, Dr. Charles Stanley's daily devotion is titled Encouragement from the Past. It's based on Romans 15, verse 4. Everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. Dr. Stanley writes, one of the most painful, destructive ways the enemy will attack is by suggesting you're alone in your struggles. But understand that's a lie. God has given you the testimonies of His faithful servants, so you'll know He will not fail you or forsake you. They experienced times that tried their faith just as you do, and because they endured and trusted God, you can too. So what is it you struggle with today? Do you need faith to receive a promise like Abraham? Deliverance from the pit to the palace like Joseph? a path through a difficult obstacle like Moses, strength to overcome adversaries like Joshua, forgiveness like David, or provision like the disciples. Look to your predecessors in the faith and be encouraged. God didn't fail them. Rest assured that he won't disappoint you either. And he prays, Lord, thank you that I'm not alone in the trials I face. You've intervened for people throughout history, and I know you'll help me. Amen. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode, and I pray for each and every one of you that you're keeping your eyes on Jesus, especially at a time like this. We all know how dark it is out there, and we know that the only source of truth and light is Jesus Christ, and of course all of his carefully preserved word through the pages of our Holy Bible. These are the things that we need to be immersed in at this time, and of course ministering to others as best we can, and also getting the good news, the gospel truth, out to as many people as possible, because the hour is absolutely late. Until next time, if there is next time, I pray for each and every one of you. God bless you. Take care. And as always, Maranatha.